A few months after the leadership battle that brought down Margaret Thatcher, France too had a new Prime Minister, though under rather different circumstances. Michel Rocard had never been entirely on side with President Mitterrand, and finally relations had become so bad that Mitterrand forced him to resign, and instead appointed Edith Cresson to be the country's first female Prime Minister. The northern portion of Somalia declared independence as the Republic of Somaliland. The lands around the Horn of Africa had been colonised by Britain, France and Italy during the 19th century, and after World War II the Italian part had come under British administration until 1960, when both parts were given independence, separately, but then decided to unite as a single country called Somalia. But years of military dictatorship had taken their toll by the mid-80s, and resistance movements sprang up across the north of Somalia, aided by Ethiopia's communist Derg regime. When the dictatorship of General Siad Barre collapsed in January, the various tribal and local groups in northern Somalia got together to decide that they would separate from Somalia once more under the presidency of Abdirahman Ahmed Ali Tur. Across the border in Ethiopia, meanwhile, the Derg itself was on its last legs. Deprived of the Soviet support that had propped it up over the last decades, it looked like Ethiopia itself might collapse into a patchwork of states as the various independence movements that had been fighting the regime since before the Great Famine now united and began to push government forces back to Addis Ababa. President Mengistu Haile Mariam looked for a while as if he was going to fight to the last, but American brokerage persuaded him to flee to Zimbabwe and go into exile, which he did 3 days after the Somaliland Independence Declaration, and the Alliance of Independence movements now had to decide what to do next. In the short time between those two events, the Yugoslav Republic of Croatia also voted for independence, following in the footsteps of her northern neighbour Slovenia. Neither state had yet formally attempted to break away, like the various Soviet states who had expressed similar desires, and the world waited to see what would happen when they did. Meanwhile, in Bari, Red Star Belgrade won the European Cup, defeating Marseille on penalties after 120 goalless minutes. Young Croatian star Robert Prosinecki scored the first penalty for Red Star. Manuel Amoros missed Marseille's first, everyone else scored, so it came down to Macedonian Darko Panchev to score the winner. Although the rivalry between Red Star and Dynamo Zagreb had become something of a touchstone in the wider Serbian-Croatian ethnic tensions within Yugoslavia, the lineup on the night was actually pretty mixed, with 8 Serbs, 1 Croat, 3 Montenegrins, 2 Macedonians, 1 Bosnian and 1 Romanian in the matchday squad, plus 1990 World Cup star Dragan Stojkovic on the bench for Marseille. And a Lauda Air Boeing 767 en route from Hong Kong to Vienna crashed near Bangkok after making a layover there. The thrust reverser on one of the engines, used to brake on landing, had engaged mid-flight and thrown the aircraft into a spin, breaking up mid-air and killing all 223 people on board, the deadliest air accident in Thai history. Niki Lauda himself went out to Thailand to take part in the investigation, and he soon became frustrated with Boeing's insistence that the accident was the fault of Pratt & Whitney, who made the engines, or the aircrew, who they said should have been able to recover from the spin. Lauda flew the same conditions in the simulator and crashed every time, but still Boeing stonewalled. The simulator wasn't accurate, they said. Finally, Lauda offered to take up a 767 himself with the crew, activate the reverser mid-flight and see what happened. Boeing said no. He asked why. They said, well, it wouldn't be survivable. He got that in writing. It had taken Boeing 8 months to admit any fault in the design. The F1 teams meanwhile headed off to Canada for the race in Montreal. Always a hotbed of Ferrari support thanks to its large Italian diaspora, and particularly since Gilles Villeneuve's heroics in the number 27 car, now occupied by Alain Prost. The track had been resurfaced in part since last year, and the pit lane entrance tweaked slightly, and the motto "Salut Gilles" had been painted on the start-finish line. But the Ferrari team themselves seemed to be going through another of their periods of civil war, and after having been read the riot act before Monaco, Cesare Fiorio was sacked between races, with Claudio Lombardi brought in from Lancia's rally and sports car team as his interim replacement, as part of a triumvirate also comprising Piero Lardi Ferrari, Enzo's illegitimate son, and Marco Piccinini, who announced a line had been drawn under the previous unpleasantness. Prost, for his part, was at the centre of rumours of a new French super team being allegedly planned by Gilles Villeneuve, with Elf and Renault already on board, and with talk of Michelin tyres and financial input both from his old buddy President Mitterrand and Cyril de Rouvre, looking for new investment after selling AGS, and Mansour Ogier of TAG possibly also involved. With Prost replacing a fading Boutsen and Comas as a new young star, the talk, at least, was very optimistic. John Barnard was notably not in evidence in Canada, reputedly in bad odour both with Flavio Briatore and his Camel and Ford paymasters, all allegedly unhappy that he seemed to be more interested in setting up his new research centre in Godalming and neglecting the development of the B191. Ford, for their part, meanwhile, had announced that they would begin work on a V12 engine for exclusive use by Benetton next year. Harvey Postlethwaite had also left Tyrrell, with Mercedes buying out his contract, and the Tyrrell technical team, which had already lost aerodynamicist Jean-Claude Migiot to Ferrari in the off-season, was now headed by George Wrighton. Mercedes have been running a very successful sports car operation of late, with a stable of talented young German and Austrian drivers and a partnership with chassis builder Peter Sauber, and their poaching of Postlethwaite, along with their support for the Ilmor concerns foray into F1 engines, strengthened rumours that the Silver Arrows might be returning to F1. And several teams were already in financial trouble. Lamborghini were refusing to put any more money into what is officially the independent Modena racing team, especially as the firm's American owners, Chrysler, are considering selling the brand, with sales of the new Lamborghini Diablo sports car having been disappointing in North America. 40% of the shares in the team have already been sold off to Japanese real estate firm Central Park, whose logo now adorns the airbox. Brabham are also running short of money, with the initial investment by Middlebridge, a British-based firm exporting classic cars to Japan, almost gone and no sign of any more, or much in the way of sponsorship. Despite its obvious limitations, the Yamaha V12 engine is one of the assets the team has, and there is already talk of them having to sell it off just to stay afloat. And the once great Lotus team continue their search for funding as Julian Bailey's money runs out, and until he raises some more at least. In the meantime, test driver Johnny Herbert returns to the team, though presumably only until someone better funded shows up. Car number 12, Johnny Herbert. Johnny's star seemed to have waned in Formula 1 over the last couple of years. There was a feeling he might have been rushed back into the cockpit too quickly by Benetton in 1989 after his accident, and since then he'd been building his confidence as official test driver for Lotus, as well as competing in Japanese F3000 with the Le Mans team, with whom he'd finished third in the 1990 standings, before standing in for Martin Donnelly in F1. He would hope at least that this stint would last longer than that one. Another driver not in the pits was Alex Caffey. Having survived his horrific shunt in Monaco with nothing worse than cuts and bruises, he celebrated by getting very drunk and then trying to drive home, wrapped his sports car round a tree, and broke his jaw. Silly boy, and fortunately for his sake nobody else appears to have been hurt, so joining his 10th Formula 1 team and reuniting with his old mucker Michele Alboreto was Stefan Johansson. The Ferrari days seem a long time ago for both drivers now, though Alboreto remains the last driver to win in Canada in a Ferrari. Stefan, meanwhile, was enjoying life racing sports cars for Mazda, which meant he had no real need to engage in team PR, and quickly described the Porsche engine as gutless. And Belgian newspaper Het Laatste Nieuws was reporting that Bertrand Gachot was shortly to be issued a court summons in the UK over a traffic incident in December, when he'd used CS gas, which he hadn't realised was illegal in the UK, to defend himself from an irate London cabbie. Neither Gachot nor Eddie Jordan had a comment to make, but this kind of thing, especially for a first offence and with mitigating circumstances, usually only results in a fine. Also, editing Matt here, I've just noticed that this was the first race where Bertrand Gachot debuted his new helmet design, which you can see in this picture. He's changed a broad yellow stripe for a broad blue stripe with the EU circle of stars on it. There were some new evolutions of engines for Renault, again, and Yamaha. Jordan got access to the same spec Ford HB as Benetton, and for the Larousse, Coloni and Fonmetal teams, who all have their Ford DFRs tuned by Brian Hart, he'd got a new version of it, while Heine Mada had done the same job for AGS, who also got a new rear suspension designed by Christian van der Plein. And so with all of that done, it was time to get racing. Well, nearly, because on Thursday night a fire under the Concorde Bridge knocked out all the telecoms to and from the Ile Notre Dame, and it was only sterling work by promoter Normand Legault that got mobile phones handed out and a temporary microwave transmitter installed to allow the assembled journalists to do their thing before comms could be re-established on Friday night. None of which stopped Rob Hurley capturing his usual great footage of the pre-race sessions, which I hope you have been enjoying so far. Once again, the Dallara and Jordan cars won easily through pre-qualifying. Dallara's podium at Imola would almost certainly get them out of the early sessions once the pack was reshuffled before Germany, with Guiar feeling a lot better about the new Fonmetal but still a second off the pace, and the Lambos and Chavez and the Coloni looking increasingly adrift, the luckless Portuguese driver never having much chance to put up a good time before his gearbox broke. Again. The weather was changeable, and in Friday practice Senna's Honda V12 threw a cylinder, dumping oil all over the track and ending his session prematurely, while Patrese arrived and found the oil the hard way, skidding backwards into the barriers, unfortunately out of the view of Mr. Hurley in the stands, which red flagged the session. Friday qualifying was wet, so it all came down to Saturday, and for the first time in 1991 it wasn't Ayrton Senna on pole, but Riccardo Patrese driving through some very sore muscles, particularly his neck, who outqualified Mansell for the 5th time in 5 races to take his 4th career pole position. Mansell joined him on the front row, relegating Senna to row 2 for the first time since Portugal last year, lining up alongside his BFF Alain Prost, who was only 0.03 quicker than surprise package Roberto Moreno, 5th alongside Berger, who was still struggling to get his McLaren set up right. Alesi and Piquet were on row 4, with Modena, Pirro and De Cesaris all having great sessions to line up 9th, 10th and 11th, with Nakajima 12th in the other Tyrrell. Gasho was 14th in the other Jordan, the Minardis looked promising in 15th and 18th, 1989 winner Boutsen was down in 16th, birthday boy Brundle, 32 on Saturday, was 20th ahead of Alboreto, with Hakkinen 24th alongside Gugelmin. Johansson dragged the second footwork onto the grid, 25th, and Comas brought up the rear. Johnny Herbert's race car broke, so he had to try and qualify the spare, which went about as well for him as it had for Bailey previously, and he joined Blundell, making his debut in DNQ land, and the AGSs, who were only hundredths of a second off the grid, but off it all the same. Sunday's weather was much better, with sunshine and a stiff breeze across the St Lawrence Seaway as they lined up ready to go, with Patrese having skipped the morning warm-up in favour of getting some physio and a pain-killing injection in his stiff neck. There was a long hold before the green light. Patrese went fractionally early, then lifted just as the green actually did come on, so while he didn't lose out too much, the two Williamses went neck and neck into the first corner and came out with Mansell ahead, with Senna and Prost 3rd and 4th, and Berger moving up ahead of Moreno, chased by Alesi. Mansell quickly began to pull away from his teammate as Alesi got past Moreno again, and then Berger to begin lap 2 tucked up behind his team leader. Berger had a misfire, in fact, in his Honda V12, and soon enough Moreno and Piquet both came past too, while Alesi seemed to be looking for a way past Prost, perhaps keen to impress the new men in charge. Moreno moved over to allow Piquet through too, while Berger now had Stefano Modena clambering all over the back of the McLaren. Both footworks suffered from the same problem at the same time on lap 3, their accelerators blocked by an air filter, and Alboreto was out, but Johansson's car was sent back out after lengthy repairs. Aguri Suzuki, meanwhile, had a spectacular fire when a fuel line broke and helped the marshals to put it out, creating a lovely fog across the track just after the main hairpin. Behind the Williamses, meanwhile, Prost was right up behind Senna, with Alesi maintaining a watching brief behind, while Berger pitted to see if anything could be done about that misfire. And all the time, Mansell was pulling away from Patrese and building a big lead, while Senna just couldn't seem to get away from Prost and get close to Patrese ahead of him. Ferrari's woes and McLaren's domination had been such of late that it seemed a while since we'd had a proper ding-dong Prost-Senna scrap, so this was great stuff for the neutral. With things having settled down a little, the order was then Mansell leading Patrese, Senna, Prost, Alesi and Piquet in the top 6, then Moreno, Modena, De Cesaris and Gasho, while Brundle had to come in with a broken gear lever and lost 4 laps getting it replaced. Senna's Honda was coughing a bit, but still had enough grunt to keep Prost behind it as Berger gave it up for the day, and Moreno clipped the curb at the last chicane, spinning into the middle of the track and avoiding being hit until he could get going again, but he damaged his suspension in the process and was out. While the cameras were watching all that, Prost either missed his braking or fumbled for a gear, depending on who you ask, at the hairpin, while trying a move on Senna, and both Alesi and Piquet piled past, dropping Prost to 6th, as Nakajima slid into a wall and headed off for new boots. Meanwhile, just out of the points and off camera, Modena and De Cesaris were having a terrific scrap over 7th, with Gasho just behind, until he replicated Moreno's spin, though without breaking anything, and rejoined 13th, then came in for new boots and to have some of the rubbish taken out of his radiators. Martini had a spin round the back of the circuit and abandoned his Minardi on the track, but it caused no problems, and a couple of laps later it was Häkkinen's turn, an ambitious overtaking move on Johansson at the end of the lap, sending him bouncing through the gravel trap and leaving him stranded facing the wrong way. Like Martini, he hopped out and left the marshals to it. It was about a third distance now, and with Brundle also out around the same time with a dead engine, Häkkinen was just the 7th retirement. And then, suddenly, Senna was pulling over and waving, his alternator having packed up. Alesi, taken by surprise, braked to avoid running into the back of the McLaren, and Piquet pounced, taking the place while Prost followed through a few corners later. Senna rolled it as far as he could, but it was clear he wasn't going to be making it 5 wins from 5, and a rare double technical failure for McLaren. Piquet peeled in for new Pirellis at the end of lap 27, just as Prost's gearbox gave up and he rolled to a frustrated stop. All of which put Alesi up to 3rd behind the two Williamses, with Mansell now leading Patrese by 11 seconds and Alesi by 31, followed by Piquet, Modena and Capelli, and Alesi shortly came in for his own tyre stop, dropping behind Piquet again. For a race where Goodyear had been recommending D compounds and predicted no stops, there had been quite a few of them so far as track temperatures were starting to soar. On the stroke of half distance, Alesi's V12 expired, taking any pressure off Piquet and promoting Modena to 4th, while Mansell had by now lapped everyone up to 6th placed Leto, who was having a fine scrap with 5th place Capelli as Mansell bore down on the pair of them. Patrese, meanwhile, had picked up a right rear puncture and had to tiptoe round half a lap before he could get it replaced, which dropped him to 6th, and he was lapped by Mansell while in the pits. So Piquet took over 2nd place, nearly a minute behind Nigel Mansell, but Nelson had stopped and Nigel hadn't, so if the Brit did make a stop for tyres, it could end up still being quite a close finish. And of course, Nelson would be looking at Mansell's previous rotten luck in 1991 so far, and hoping he might well snag an unexpected win to go with his 2 from the end of last year. So it was Mansell, Piquet and Modena in the top 3, and the only cars on the lead lap with 20 laps to go, with Capelli running a fine 4th until his engine blew, which promoted Leto, with Patrese now 5th and bearing down on him, getting past at the Casino hairpin on lap 47. De Cesaris was holding 6th in the Jordan, while his teammate was 8th and worrying at Martini in 7th, with Comas and Pirro completing the top 10. Modena made a pit stop for tyres on lap 48, dropping to 5th, just as Gasho got past Martini to go up to 7th. The number 6 Williams, meanwhile, was now flying, with Patrese putting up a series of fastest laps as he set about recovering from his unplanned tyre stop. Leto's race ended with a Judd failure after 50 laps, so now it was Mansell, Piquet, Patrese, Modena, De Cesaris and Gasho in the points as the race entered its last stages. Mansell had slowed now and was losing a couple of seconds a lap to Piquet, but with over 50 seconds in hand, Piquet had a big mountain to climb to catch and pass him, unless, of course, Mansell had a problem or was preparing to make a late tyre stop. At any rate, Patrese soon caught up and unlapped himself, setting off in a probably equally futile pursuit of Piquet. Johansson had done his usual solid job for footwork, but trailed in with an assortment of problems on lap 56, the main culprit being that gutless engine, and Patrese was having problems of his own now, with his gearbox starting to skip gears, and Mansell had to decide whether to ease off and follow him or re-lap him. Both of them lapped Gugelmin, running dead last, and the Brazilian soon gave up with an overheating Ilmor with just 8 laps to go. By that time, with Patrese unable to make any headway on Piquet, and Mansell so far ahead of his old rival, the race was proceeding to its inevitable conclusion, and it looked like a real win for the old stagers, with Mansell, Piquet and Patrese having a combined total of somewhere north of 500 starts between them. In 4th was Stefano Modena, looking like he might get some points to give him some solace after his exit in Monaco, while the Jordans were 5th and 6th, with Eddie in the garage watching on and crossing every digit that they would score his team's first points in F1. With a couple of laps to go, Mansell re-lapped Patrese so that the Italian's flagging gearbox would have one fewer lap to do at the end of the race. In fact, Patrese gearbox was flagging to such an extent that Modena had been catching him rapidly, and suddenly the Tyrrell was right behind. Sore and with a malfunctioning car, Patrese didn't make a fight of it, and Modena came through into the podium places. Mansell began his last lap, giving the crowd a little wave as he cruised around, and then suddenly at the casino hairpin, he faltered. Modena shot past as Mansell pounded the wheel in frustration, his Williams coasting as Piquet charged through to take his 23rd career win and his third in Canada, with Stefano Modena coming through to take a delighted and thoroughly unexpected second place, which must have been a tonic for him and Tyrrell after their bitter disappointment in Monaco. Patrese held on for third, De Cesaris and Gasho swept through in fourth and fifth to take a nice 5-point haul for Jordan, and devastated Mansell, classified sixth, peered at the back of his car before hitching a lift back to the pits on the back of Patrese's. Martini, Comas, Pirro and Nakajima were the remaining runners at the end of the race. Not a bad day in the end for Toronto's Italian contingent, despite Ferrari's disappointment with 3 Italians in the top 6 and 5 in the top 10. And not a bad day for Brazil either, despite Senna's mishap, because Piquet's win extends the country's winning streak to 7 on the trot, with Senna and Piquet topping the table. Both men found themselves at the same pizza restaurant in Toronto that night and, as usual, studiously ignored each other. The legendary Juan Manuel Fangio presented the trophies as Piquet and Modena particularly enjoyed the occasion, but the inquest over Mansell was already beginning back home. He'd been pushing hard and setting fastest laps in the middle of the race while leading by miles. Had he done too much and run out of fuel, strained some part too hard? Had he, as some suggested, been busy waving to the crowd and missed a gear or knocked his engine kill switch or something stupid like that? The British press, already critical of Mansell's underperformance so far this year, would be all over this, despite Frank Williams' assurance that it was just an unfortunate electrical fault in the gearbox. Mansell himself was too distraught to comment, heading straight for his private jet and his new pad in Florida, where he's moved from the Isle of Man to be near his great golfing buddy Greg Norman. So, with just 2 weeks to go until the next race in Mexico, the teams would be loading up their transporters and preparing for a long drive, and the journalists had plenty to write about in the meantime.